Meccan Revelations Part 2 on chicken philosophy, in which I'll be subtly and over a long period of time pointing out that there is a lot going on in the thousands of years of Islamic thought. By focusing on Ibn Arabi's work, what we have of it in English, namely Meccan Revelations, the book, the English book, not the volumes and volumes of the Futuhat, but the highlights that you can find in these two volumes, starting with the section called Ibn Arabi's Life and Posterity. An abundance of excellent books intended to introduce Ibn Arabi's life, historical context, and basic teachings to general audiences have appeared in recent years. Here it may suffice to recall that he was born in present-day Murcia, not Murica, Murcia, in Al-Andalusia in 1165/560. So that's 560 according to the Islamic calendar, counting from the birth of Muhammad. Comment below if it was the ascension from the spot where the Dome of the Rock is now, since he was a prophet in the Jewish religion. 1165, he wasn't accepted by... Never mind, I'll just keep reading. 1165 according to the common calendar, the Jesus one. All right. Yes, he was born in that place in that time, was raised in the great cultural centers of Islamic Spain, where his extraordinary spiritual gifts were already apparent by his adolescence, traveled and encountered innumerable spiritual teachers and friends of God, end quote, throughout Spain and North Africa in his youth, and left that area definitively for the Hajj. That means pilgrimage, to go to Mecca, the Kaaba, which brought him to Mecca. Yeah, so same page. And the incidents that gave rise to the Meccan Revelations. In 1202, also known as 598, his years of maturity were spent in travel and teaching, parentheses, usually privately, and with none of the public charisma and mass following of the more celebrated saints of his day, end parentheses. Throughout the narrowing confines of the Islamic East, which was caught between the inroads of the Crusaders and the ongoing conquests of the Mongol hordes. Yeah, good times. You got the Crusades on one side and and Genghis Khan's kids on the other. Not good times. That was when Rumi was... he was the son of an imam in present-day Afghanistan, if I'm not mistaken, and all of the Hindus, Buddhists, Jews, and Eastern Orthodox Christians, as well as Muslims who were being persecuted by either the Crusades from the West or the Mongols from the East, or both. He gave safe haven on his acres and acres of property, and told the local sultan, just surrender to Genghis Khan, because then we get to live. Simple math, right? And you just pay taxes and go about your business. All right, where were we? Sorry for the aside. So it was the same period, in other words. Right. Eventually he settled for a time in Konya, parentheses, in present-day Turkey, end parentheses, and then in Damascus, where he died on November 9th, 1240, also known as 638. And that concludes our story. Just kidding. Doesn't conclude the story. It just sets the parameters. This is when he was born. This is when he died. Now we're going to talk about all the stuff that goes in between those two major events in one's life. His place of burial, there has been a famous pilgrimage site since Ottoman times. That's an awkward sentence, I got to admit. While all of Ibn Arabi's writings, and most especially the Futuhat, this one, are replete with autobiographical discussions of his extraordinary inner visionary life and spiritual experiences, everything that is known about him from external sources indicates that in his later years, he rigorously lived up to his own ideal of the hidden, quote, solitary, end quote, friends of God, parentheses, the Afrad or Malamia, no, not that, end parentheses, as the highest of the spiritual ranks, quote, invisible, end quote, in their outward conformity to the normative practices of the revelation and the ethical and social obligations common to all. Hey, that's interesting. Isn't that one of the 5 major tenets upheld by the Rosicrucians that started with a young boy of Dutch complexion coming to Damascus approximately 400 years after this and being initiated into a mysterious unnamed temple? I wonder if there's a connection between Ibn al-Arabi and Father Christian Rosenkreutz. Don't you? Well, you do now. All right, I'll keep reading. Yes. What? Right. Carefully avoiding the public, visible, quote, spiritual gifts, end quote, parentheses, karamat, end parentheses, popularly associated with many sheikhs and the then nascent forms of institutionalized Sufism. Although he was accompanied by a small group of friends and close disciples who became the eventual vehicles for his later wider influence, Ibn Arabi seems to have been best known in his own day as a religious scholar and student of hadith, an impression that could only have been encouraged by his phenomenally prolific literary output of hundreds of works, of which the Futuhat was apparently by far the longest and most impressive. Even Ibn Arabi's most skeptical biographers have been compelled to note the remarkable way subsequent history has come to confirm his self-conception of his destined role as the, quote, seal of Muhammadan sainthood, end quote. And that's seal like stamp, not like R, obviously. No need to even clarify that. All right. Whose voluminous writings, and more important, the underlying spiritual, quote, reality, end quote, the Muhammadan reality, mentioned in part 1. We talked about this, right? You were there, weren't you? That they are meant to reveal and convey were specially intended to open up the inner spiritual meanings at the heart of all preceding prophetic revelations, parentheses, and especially the Quran and Hadith, end parentheses. At the time of his death, Ibn Arabi himself was virtually unknown in any wider public sense in that Mongol/Crusader period when Islamic public authority almost vanished for some decades from all but a handful of Arab cities, parentheses, and permanently from most of his native Al-Andalusia, End parentheses. Really? That's interesting. I know that it formally was made Catholic in 1492, which might sound familiar because there's a movie with that title. And that was when Christopher Columbus sailed trying to find India and missed by a lot. But yeah, it's interesting that he was working for a king that had only just started ruling Spain that same year. Kind of sheds a different light on the whole Christopher Columbus thing. In 1491, it was still under its 800 years of Arab rule or Islamic rule. There's this thing now where I saw this video today where it said Iran is not Arab, and I'm like, well, I mean, it was part of the Arab world, the Arab empire, the Arabian Empire, right? Their script is the Arabic one. I mean, it's like, I guess people are very sensitive about it. We're Farsi, we're Persian, we're not Arab. That's two different things. And it's like, well, yeah. England under Rome was England, the British Isles. But it was part of the Roman Empire, right? But you would be mistaken to call a present-day British person Roman unless you were using it as an adjective to describe their Romanness. Right? And someone said it's like saying someone from Iran is Arab is the same as saying a French person is English because they both use the Roman alphabet. No, actually, it would be the same as calling a French person Roman because they use the Roman alphabet and speak and write a language that's basically Latin with a twist. Sorry, I don't mean to offend anyone. Persia has a great and wonderful history that has nothing to do with the Islamic or Arabic world, frankly. They were the good guys. I'm sticking to it. The Spartans, bunch of backwards assholes. Yes. It was definitely the most civilized empire that had existed yet when the Persian Empire was in its height, for sure. I mean, not much to compare it to Assyrian and Babylonian and Akkadian. Not much competition. The bar was pretty low, but for the time, the Persian Empire was pretty civilized. Anyway, so see, if I say Aryan, it sounds wrong because of my hair and because of the misunderstandings in Germany in the 30s, but you know who you are. Right? Maybe not. You probably don't know who you are. But that's okay. I mean, it doesn't really matter. The DNA, Gordon used to say, was the wrong direction, getting hung up on DNA and ancestry and all this Dune shit, that it's about the spirit. The spirit is that way. The DNA is the wrong fucking direction. It's, quit the material, seek the spiritual. Don't get obsessed with DNA. Because I was like making the DNA alphabet and making it a magical thing. And he's like, stop this shit. He was one of my teachers. He was a good guy. All right. Where was I? I don't know. Vehicles. Arabi seems to have been known in his day. Yes. Even from, skeptical biographers, we're past all this, aren't we? Convey, were especially intended to open up the inner spiritual meanings. Okay, we're somewhere in between. And, reality, that they are meant to reveal, were specially intended to open up the inner spiritual meanings at the heart. No, we read this at the time, Mongol Crusader, yeah. Right. But, okay, now I'm all caught up. I'm back where I was, and so are you. Moreover, all of his books, in quotes, discussed here existed only in a handful of manuscript copies left behind in the Maghreb. I don't know how to pronounce that. It's probably not how I pronounced it. or restricted to the assiduous students and future transmitters of his teachings during his final years in Damascus. Yet within a few centuries, though one of those mysterious developments so familiar to the historian of religions, is that though or through? Through one of those mysterious developments so familiar to the historian of religions. His writings, foremost among them, the Basils of Wisdom, or Fusus al-Hakim, and these Meccan Revelations, had come to constitute the constantly cited source of inspiration and justification, parentheses, and as a result, a frequent polemic target, end parentheses. Okay. For that vast movement, I had one of those this morning. Sorry, I don't mean that. Scratch that. Just forget I said anything. For that vast movement of religious, cultural, social, and literary creativity that brought into being the institutions and masterworks of the Islamic humanities. Period. Oh, right. Okay. That was the end of the sentence. Let me try that again. Oh, because there was some parentheses thrown in there. That's a long-ass sentence. Okay, let me try reading this sentence without the parentheses. Yet within a few centuries, through one of those mysterious developments so familiar to the historian of religions, his writings, foremost among them the Basils of Wisdom, and these Meccan Revelations, had come to constitute the constantly cited source of inspiration and justification for that vast movement of religious, cultural, social, and literary creativity that brought into being the institutions and masterworks of the Islamic humanities. That's the sentence. And there's parentheses in it that make it even longer than that. Okay, here we are. It was through those creative developments in a wide gamut of languages, cultures, and new institutions that Islam became a true world religion, with its new cultural and political centers stretching from southern and eastern Europe and sub-Saharan Africa across to Central Asia, India, and Southeast Asia. Despite the historically quite significant recent ideological responses to colonialism, the transformations of modernity and the new demands of the nation-state, most Muslims throughout the world have lived for the past 6 or 7 centuries in cultural, spiritual, and religious worlds whose accomplished forms would be unimaginable without the profound impact of ideas rooted in and expressed by Ibn Arabi. So that's why we're reading this, so you can understand a little better rather than just otherizing people. Yeah? It's like there's more to language than language. It's not just, what's your word for apple? It's like, what are the complex, sophisticated, ornate, and beautiful, and maybe incorrect in some cases, or incorrect in others, or just interesting, unprovable, kind of like a paradigm. What is the paradigm? What are the paradigms? When are the paradigms? What did they come out of that are assumed and presupposed and almost subconscious and forgotten within the collective consciousness of the person that you're just watching the news going, oh, those people. You know what I'm saying? Sorry, that's too much. Too many things at once. Let's just stick to this. We'll stick to this. Right, yes. Here we are. And a second equally mysterious stage in Ibn Arabi's ongoing influence has been the ways his writings and concepts have served over the past century to inspire contemporary intellectuals and students of religion and spirituality outside traditionally Islamic cultures. If you clicked that thing, in part one of this Ibn Arabi, the Meccan Revelations, Chicken Philosophy, I said, click here, the Carl Jung episode 23, in which, skip to 11. In fact, I'll just tell you again, click here and skip to the 11-minute mark, and you'll hear me explain a bit. I don't think I shared the story, and without going into too much detail, so I have to be a little bit careful, because the freedom of speech that one takes for granted in one's own country of origin is not always granted to those who are not in their country of origin. Does that make sense? So I was talking to this guy. I won't say where or in what country or what his background is or what his assumptions are or what the assumptions of everybody in that city, which is the capital of the country, whatever country it is I'm talking about. I don't know. So this guy is a CEO of a hospital, right? And he was leaning over to me while we were waiting for this low-level politician to come in white robes and gold rings and question me a lot about my motives for wanting to live somewhere. I don't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, so this CEO leans over to me and he's talking, basically saying, boy, these poor guys over there in the Middle East having to deal with those Muslims. I'm like, and I'm locked in a thing because he's helping me out because of his connection to the politician and all this other stuff. So I can't just be like, what the fuck? So I was just like, if you want to blame somebody for that situation, blame the British for, in World War I promising this group of people that they would have a homeland and promising that group of people that they would get to self-govern in that same land because they wanted help from them to fight the Ottomans and they wanted money from them to pay for the war. It was like a short-term solution that caused long-term problems. If you want to blame somebody, blame the British. And not only that, but they drew a line in another country, I don't know what country we're talking about, and said all the Muslims go on that side of the line and all the whoever else stay on this side of the line. And then that caused a series of wars as well, while the British were just sitting back watching it all in the news going, oh, how terrible. Oh, those people over there and their problems. Yeah, that you fucking started, And so then the CEO was like willing to jump across that little fence I had created and talk shit about the British instead, which is much more within my comfort zone as an American. And yeah, that wasn't the only thing, but that was definitely a catalyst that made me decide, you know what, I'm going to start reading Meccan Revelations on chicken philosophy and do my part to help open maybe one person's mind this much toward not just otherizing 2 billion people and saying, oh, those people are weird, they've got some backwards ideas. No, they speak in a language. You speak in Christianity. English is Christianity. The first English sentence ever written was dictated by St. Augustine. It was, if you steal from the church, you have to pay it back times 12. And our entire language, the word worship, all the words in the English language that revolve around any kind of religious thought or anything like that are all with the Christian assumptions. So they're there even if you're an atheist. Even if you've been an atheist for 6 generations in your family, you've still got the imprint of Christian ideas. Similarly, there's 2 billion people who have the imprint of a lot of these ideas. So let's look at these ideas and think about them instead of just otherizing them and demonizing them. Shall we? That's kind of where I'm coming from. So it is what it is. Maybe I'm totally fucked and wrong. I don't know. Could be. I doubt it, though. Anyway, where were we? A second equally mysterious stage in Ibn Arabi's ongoing influence has been the ways in which his writings and concepts have served over the past century to inspire contemporary intellectuals and students of religion and spiritually outside traditionally Islamic cultures. Period. Okay? Sometimes the periods take me by surprise. Full stops, that is. Americans call those periods. I know it sounds funny in British because it just, what do you mean the menstrual, whatever. Okay, faced with we use that same word for that part of the menstrual cycle as well, but in context we know whether we're talking about the punctuation mark or the... Faced with a cosmopolitan, multi-religious world, not unlike the great Muslim empires of the Ottomans, Safavids, and Mongols, these thinkers have increasingly relied on Ibn Arabi's works and ideas. Yeah, see, that's the thing, is like they were ruling a vast amount of territory, and there was dialogue. There were some caliphates that were fucked. There were some people that were like, you better, yeah. There were when coffee came around, there were some local rulers that decided coffee was of the devil. And then there were other local rulers that loved coffee and they drank it. So there were some areas like ancient Spain where you could freely talk about any subject with whoever and nobody cared. And then there were other areas, generally closer to Mecca, that were a little bit like, what are you saying over there exactly? Like you gotta kind of be, I was just saying, there is only one God and Muhammad is his prophet. Like you gotta kind of like watch what you're saying in certain areas, but not in other areas. And there was a lot of conversation going on. Meanwhile, a few hundred years later, in Europe, you had to watch what you were saying or you'd be barbecued. I mean, it was just straight up no conversation allowed. If somebody was Jewish, they had to keep it to themselves. If somebody was practicing like herbal medicine, they had to keep it to themselves. If somebody was thinking in a slightly different way about Christianity than the Vatican was, they had to keep it to themselves. There was no conversation allowed. There was no dialogue allowed. So from the perspective of that, looking at these two examples of the ancient past of these two groups, clearly one of them is preferable, and it ain't Europe. Hot take of the day. All right. Ibn Arabi's works and ideas maybe today is a little different, but back then, the task of creating the common language and subtle conceptual structure required to communicate universal spiritual realities in an increasingly global civilization. We're talking about 1,000 years ago, by the way. But it's become relevant to the West this past century. We just finally caught up with Ibn Arabi is basically what it's saying. The origin... that's the end of the section. And, rather than start another section, we read one section today, and it's like in the general vicinity of a half an hour, especially on account of my rambling. The train says hi. I hope that you're offended. Comment below. Smack that dislike button. Smash that dislike button. Engage with this video. Tell me why I'm fucked, right? Or whatever, if you like the video, then, do feel free and subscribe and click like and all that stuff. And I bid you salam and shalom and shanti. And I will catch up with you next time in part 3 of Chicken Philosophy's Meccan Revelations recitals. Until then,